Floating in space isn't for everyone. After all, you have to shell out between $50 and $60 million to wear a spacesuit and see Earth from the dark vastness. But when you start thinking about the dangers, the idea can quickly turn into a nightmare. One of the most terrifying scenarios is drifting in the vacuum and, even worse, opening the helmet of your suit for some reason. The notion that space is a ruthless place where any mistake can cost you your life is no exaggeration. When it comes to outer space, many believe that instant freezing would be the inevitable fate of someone who opened their helmet. And who can blame them? After all, the average temperature of interplanetary space is about -455 degrees Fahrenheit or -270 degrees Celsius. But to understand what really happens, we need to dismantle this misconception. The cold of space doesn't work the same way as cold here on Earth, and the idea that a person would immediately freeze is actually a myth. On Earth, we're used to feeling cold because the air around us is constantly drawing heat from our bodies. This process happens because the air is in direct contact with our skin, and all matter in nature always seeks to be in equilibrium. Thus, heat exchange occurs through thermal convection, a form of heat transfer that takes place in liquids, gases, and vapors. Since your body is small compared to the atmospheric air on Earth, you'll feel cold as a thermal equilibrium is being attempted. In space, however, there aren't enough molecules to conduct or convect heat effectively. The only way to lose heat in space is through radiation, which is another form of heat transfer, a much slower process. In other words, there is no instant freezing. If someone were to open their helmet in space, their body would start to lose heat, but so slowly that you'd have enough time to face much worse problems before even starting to get cold. This is where things get even more terrifying. The real threat doesn't come from the cold of space, but rather from the lack of pressure. The air pressure we breathe and that surrounds our bodies on Earth is what keeps us intact. In space, without this pressure, the human body starts to react in rather unexpected ways. The dissolved gases in the blood, such as oxygen and nitrogen, begin to form bubbles, a phenomenon similar to what happens to divers who surface too quickly. These bubbles rupture blood vessels and obstruct the normal flow of blood, especially to the brain. This phenomenon, known as gas embolism, can cause unconsciousness within seconds. One of the most famous and tragic cases illustrating this effect is the Soyuz 11 accident. In 1971, 3 cosmonauts aboard the first space station in history, Salyut 1, were returning to Earth after a successful mission. During re-entry, a ventilation valve on the capsule was damaged, allowing the vacuum of space to seep in. In less than 40 seconds, all crew members died from asphyxiation. Their bodies were found with bluish marks on their faces and blood coming from their noses and ears. The pressure of space, or rather, the lack of it, was what caused the death of these 3 space pioneers. However, there's an interesting case that somewhat challenges this grim narrative. In 1966, Jim LeBlanc, a NASA engineer, had a dramatic experience when he was exposed to a vacuum during a spacesuit test. He was in a high-altitude simulation chamber when an equipment failure allowed the air to escape, exposing him to near-total vacuum conditions. The pressure dropped so rapidly that LeBlanc lost consciousness in about 15 seconds. Fortunately, the technicians managed to restore the pressure in the chamber just in time, and he was rescued without any permanent damage. He described the experience as surreal and intense, feeling the air being sucked out of his lungs and noticing his saliva boiling on his tongue before blacking out. Jim LeBlanc's story proves that, although exposure to a vacuum is almost always fatal, the human body can endure for brief moments before completely collapsing. Nevertheless, even with this resilience, damage to the body begins almost immediately. After about 10 to 15 seconds of exposure, the blood loses its ability to circulate, and the oxygen in the tissues is rapidly depleted. Within 90 seconds, death is inevitable without immediate recompression. But there's another important factor that can't be ignored: the sun. In space, without the atmosphere to protect us, solar radiation is much more intense. Parts of your body exposed directly to the sun would heat up quickly, while the shaded areas would continue to cool slowly. The International Space Station, for example, experiences temperature variations from -185 degrees Fahrenheit or -120 degrees Celsius in the shaded areas to 248 degrees Fahrenheit or 120 degrees Celsius in the sunlit areas. For an astronaut without a suit, this thermal difference could cause severe burns and frostbite on different parts of the body simultaneously. Even so, these temperature changes wouldn't be instantaneous. The heating and cooling process would take time, and the person would likely already be unconscious due to the lack of oxygen before feeling the extreme effects of solar radiation. Temperature wouldn't be the biggest problem when opening a helmet in space, the vacuum would be. The real danger, however, lies in the vacuum and what it does to the body. As mentioned, the blood and bodily fluids start to expand, causing painful and potentially fatal bubbles. Your veins could literally burst. Additionally, without pressure, the oxygen in your lungs would be forced out, leaving the brain without oxygen in a matter of seconds. A person would lose consciousness quickly, but death might take a bit longer, depending on how fast the body succumbs to the hostile environment. But why do we continue to explore such an inhospitable environment? The truth is, despite the risk, humanity has always pushed toward new frontiers. The International Space Station, for example, is proof that we can survive in space, even if only temporarily, when adequately prepared. Modern spacesuits are designed to keep astronauts alive in extreme conditions, providing oxygen, proper pressure, and protection from solar radiation. However, this doesn't mean astronauts come back unscathed from space missions. A curious fact that few people know is that astronauts often face health problems after space missions due to the unique conditions of the space environment. The absence of gravity affects the human body in various ways. On Earth, gravity causes bodily fluids to concentrate in the lower part of the body. In space, without gravitational force, these fluids redistribute to the upper body, including the head. This increases pressure in the skull and eyes, causing vision problems like spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. The change in intracranial pressure can compress the optic nerve and flatten the eyeball, impairing vision. This effect is cumulative and becomes more severe the longer an astronaut spends in space, often leading to the need for glasses upon return. Astronauts are also exposed to higher levels of cosmic radiation, which can affect long-term health, including an increased risk of cataracts and other vision issues. Without the need to support body weight, astronauts' muscles and bones begin to deteriorate. This occurs because the body no longer has to fight against gravity, resulting in a significant loss of muscle and bone mass, which can cause pain and increase the risk of fractures. The spine can lengthen, resulting in a temporary increase in height. However, this elongation can also cause back pain and alignment issues when astronauts return to Earth's gravity. These effects are monitored and treated with specific rehabilitation programs after returning to Earth, but astronauts often still face lingering health problems due to the impact of space travel. Leave a comment if you would be brave enough to spend a vacation in space. See you soon, bye.